So we are here chatting with Gideon Kendall about his new series, Whatzit. I read the first volume of this. I can kind of describe it in a weird way, but it's a bizarre comic that's like really layered, and bizarre in a good way. And I think it's probably best to hear how you describe it, and then we can kind of get in from there. Because it's one where you can start off and just look at it layered. It feels very like sophomoric, not in a bad way, but like that goofy Mad
Yeah.
Magazine joke sort of thing. But like when you really start analyzing it, there's a hell of a lot of layers going into that first volume. So we'll just start off the simple of how would you describe Whatzit?
Wow. Well, I got to say, I'm more interested to hear how you would describe it because I'm sort of sick of like trying to describe it myself, but I will. Part of the problem is that like as I was getting ready to put the book out and I was trying to figure out how I would describe it, because of those layers that you mentioned, it was like, well, what do you say first? Because it is like a parallel story, a very parallel story. There's like the alien world with this nameless alien drone creature, and then there's the human world with Scott, who's a teenager there's some debate whether the story is set in 1979 or 1981. It's one or the other. I'll solidify that by the time volume 2 comes out. So it's like those two characters and they're living parallel lives, even though I hope that the reader understands that the alien's life is much worse than Scott's life, although Scott, being a miserable, spoiled American teenager, thinks that nothing could be worse than his life. And that's like one of the themes. I mean, one of the themes is definitely like perspective, like how do you step outside of yourself and see what other people are dealing with. And I think that's something that is very hard, I would presume, for any being anywhere in the universe to do.
Yeah, so when I read it, like it's interesting in that I kind of read it as almost it's a dual story about seeking freedom and independence, where you've got the aliens, which I actually wanted to ask you, like the fact that you said the nameless aliens, this nameless. I've been wondering the whole time. I'm like, well, I don't know what to call them in this interview.
That was one of the challenges in the script. I just called the alien Z because I needed to have some kind of shorthand instead of writing the nameless alien every time. So he's Z, but that's not really his name. I mean, he doesn't have a name. He wasn't born. He was extruded and created by the corporation or the system that he lives under, that he is sort of enslaved under. He was created, and so he may have a serial number, but he doesn't really have a name. Although I don't want to give anything away, but one of the things that he does when he begins to experience freedom is give himself a name. But that doesn't happen until volume 2.
Yeah, so it's an interesting in that the alien race, in that it feels like a really like it's a solid allegory on corporations and enslavement of workers and workers' rights and abuse and there's just a lot of kind of reflection on kind of the world we live in today in the form of pimples. Like
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
it's one of those, like at first I was just like, okay, this is kind of like a gross humor thing about pimples and like the real world of pimples, that they're actually these aliens trying to break through. And then you get more into it, and it's probably like maybe a quarter of the way into it, and you're just like, oh no, there's a whole lot of other things going on, and it's much more of much more in depth and layered, and like there's more thought to it than just like popping pimples is a constant joke. So I kind of want to actually talk to you about that, like how much of you going into it was things that you wanted to explore that sort of theme, like that you wanted to look at, like corporate abuse and the people being the cogs in the system and stuff like that.
I think that, well, the way it sort of came to be is that I woke up one morning with the idea. Just I've been kind of casting around for a while of like I've illustrated a lot of other people's stories, and I always wanted to do my own story, but I never really felt like I had an idea that I was willing to commit to like spending 4 or 5 years, you know, focusing on. And then when I had that idea, I thought, oh, this is really gross and funny, but that's not necessarily enough to make a whole book. I mean, you could. I mean, there's been plenty of awesome comics that are just that kind of thing, but I was trying to think about like where to take it, and I just kind of used the, you know, the adage of like write what you know. And I thought, well, what if I combined this really weird, gross idea with something really personal? And you know, I grew up definitely like in a fish out of water sort of situation, like a Jewish son of the hippie parents, Jewish, living in places where, you know, that wasn't cool at all, in rural West Virginia and Texas. And so, you know, I had experiences there in my adolescence, and I just started playing around with combining that personal stuff that I really knew with the stuff that I didn't know, you know, which is the sci-fi part of it. Like, and it's funny because like the sci-fi part was the part I wanted to draw, whereas the more personal kind of downbeat autobiographical stuff isn't that much fun to draw, you know. So I get a chance to do both in the book. As far as like the stuff about, you know, work and corporations and stuff like that, I mean, I definitely, you know, I have my own political viewpoints, which definitely run in the, you know, the super lefty progressive direction, but I've always been hesitant to like preach about that kind of stuff in the things that I make. I'm not sure why. I mean, I certainly believe that stuff, but I've always kind of liked art that was, I don't know, that was the, I'm uneasy about the place for art to do those kind of things. I'm not sure why. Maybe it's because I grew up, my parents were both like super activist types, and it always kind of made me a little uncomfortable. So I just wanted to hide and draw my pictures. Wanted some kind of separation between politics and art. Obviously, amazing comics have been made that put the politics front and center, and that's awesome. I just don't know if I could do that.
Yeah, it's interesting is that it's not necessarily the politics that's front and center. It's just there's this theme to it about like consumerism and worker, but even in like the real world with the Dr. Whatzit, like that still falls into that consumerism. So you have like Z,
Sure.
who's this like cog, and it's interesting is like the cogs are rising up to go take on Whatzit, and not to spoil things, but like, you know, that sort of spoiler. But like the like whites, they themselves, like there's this weird flip of like the folks rising up become totalitarian in a way to like fight consumerism somewhere else, but they're kind of, you can tell that they've like slightly crossed that line, and it's just it's a really interesting read to me. And like, you know, I don't know, it's one of those like I don't know if I'm reading too much into it, or like this is kind of themes that you're thinking of, or like thoughts you're gonna, but it's just I thought it was really, really interesting in like that sci-fi allegorical way of like reflecting upon themes, but in a fantastical story. Like it was just it's really interesting. It was much more than what I thought going into it, again, which I thought was like pimple jokes.
Right. Well, yeah. For me, the theme, or I guess there's a few, but like I feel like this country, like these high ideals of freedom, like for a lot of people, just basically like what that means is like the freedom to do whatever they want, or the freedom to like take whatever they want, instead of like the freedom to actually be responsible and work together, and like all the things that would really take to make a thriving, dynamic society. You know, especially now in this country, it feels like half the country's idea of freedom is just being able to act like assholes to everybody else. And that's kind of what happens in the story. Like Scott, like teenagers, I mean, I have a son who's 12, and he's a nice kid, but you know, he's experimenting with those kind of thoughts and trying to grapple with the idea of, like, you know, he wants freedom, but what kind of freedom does he want? And what kind of freedom does any teenager, or not even just teenagers, I mean, like me, like, you know, I'm selfish. We're all selfish in a way. And, you know, so if you, like, so that's why, like, when the aliens who all talk in this, they know English because they have been spying on people on Earth. And so they've developed this kind of weird garbled syntax, where basically everything gets turned into a bad word.
Yep.
And so, you know, for them, freedom is freedom, because that's just sort of the filter that they put everything through. And so the aliens want to come to Earth because they have this warped view of what Earth is, just like a whole bunch of people voted for Trump because they actually thought he was a smart businessman from watching him on TV for 25 years. Like, we all have these like ridiculous filters that we're seeing things through, and we all think that we're being oppressed when, you know, I'm a middle-aged white guy who gets to draw comics most of the day. Like, I'm not oppressed, but I still feel like I am sometimes, as dumb as that is, you know. So everyone's stuck in their own place and thinks that everybody else has it better than they do. And that's really like the theme, the overall theme of the book, along with the idea that, how would I put this? Like, this idea, like everyone is operating under these illusions of the stories that they love. So like Scott has a Star Wars poster on his wall, and lots of lingerie catalogs under his bed. And so his idea of what it means to be like a man and a hero is so fake, you know, and so does the aliens, because the aliens aren't really seeing a full picture of what life on Earth is. All they're seeing is like these little glimpses through the pimples of teenagers in this one remote part of central Pennsylvania. Is that giving away too much?
No. I mean, it's kind of the basic concept of the comic. So
yeah.
So I actually want to talk to you about the language, because I thought that was really, really interesting. You know, as you mentioned that they learned English, but they've got this really jacked up version of it. You know, how much of that's codified for you? Like, it seemed pretty consistent. It is consistent going through the story, but I gotta imagine, like, you yourself have to take notes of, like, this is how they're actually talking, and like these are the words they use to make it consistent. Like, that can't be super easy.
It's one of the most fun parts of the book, is developing the lexicon of the way that they talk. And I actually have a lexicon so that I can remember which words get substituted. Some words have like 2 or 3 possible substitutes. Part of the idea is that, so, you know, they, the more agitated or excited they get, the more garbled the language gets. So, you know, uncontrollable becomes Uncle Lardboil, you know, and things like that, depending on how much stress they're under. When I had that idea, I was like, one of the like funnest moments in making the book for me was when I had that idea, because, like, oh boy, this is a chance to like put lots of really naughty stuff in there, but for a reason, you know, like, this is the way they talk, and this, because they're just misunderstanding English, basically. And you know how, like, in sci-fi, they're always having to dance around this idea of, like, how the fuck can they communicate with each other? They're from different planets on different sides of the galaxy. So, you know, the fact that the only reason they know English is because they're addicted to spying on human teenagers is just another sort of like sad, pathetic part of the book that I really enjoy.
It's funny, is like, when I was reading it the first like 1 or 2 times it happened, I was in there, I was like, is this a mistake? Like, was this actually like the lettering issue?
Yeah.
But as it goes on, it became clear of like, oh no, this is a a conscious thing like that you were doing. I thought it was really funny the more it went on and seeing how they were just messing up the language. But there's an actual alien language in there too that they're speaking, and I'm kind of flipping through trying to find an example of it. Is there an alphabet and all that for that as well?
There probably should be, but there's not, that language isn't really going to show up that much.
For those that don't know, oh no, I just flipped off. Let me go find an example of it so people can get a clue. Yeah, there we go. You can see the alien language there in the panel.
Yeah, no, I really, you make a good point that I probably need to keep better track of that. There is going to be a thing that I'm currently working out for book 2, which is when there are scenes that take place in the alien world and Z, the main character, is no longer there, how are you going to know what the aliens are saying? Because not all the aliens talk in this broken English.
Yeah.
It's only the addict. It's only the addicts, the ones who, you know, look through the portals, that have learned the English. So it presents problems, but also opportunities. You know, it's a way to keep things mysterious that you don't know exactly what's being said.
Yeah, I actually kind of enjoyed it. The sections where there was just the alien language and nothing, like no translation, nothing about it, and that you actually got to kind of get a general sense as to what they're saying by the actions and the scene itself. Like it's pretty clear when they're saying fuck. Like that's standing around a dead body staring at the head wheel blown off. Like it's pretty damn clear what everyone's saying.
Well, it's one of the beauties of comics is like, it's this weird thing, right? You draw a picture and it's this moment frozen in time, and then you put a word balloon over it, and it could be a word balloon with like 30 words in it. And so it takes a long time to say 30 words, but it's happening over this frozen moment. And, you know, it's just, you therefore get to play with that, right? Just like you get to play with, who was it that said, you know, it's all about the space between the panels, like that's where time passes. Yeah. And so you can draw a panel, depending on how many words are in it, a panel that if it's somebody punching somebody, then it's like 1/8 of a second. But if it's two people having, you know, a serious conversation, that panel could be 15 seconds long. And so when you have an alien language in there that you can't really read, you get to even play with that more and be more vague about it.
With the aliens themselves, like you go into kind of just how you went and created this world. Like it's really unique in the design of the characters, like where they work and just everything they kind of go about. So just really interesting in like maybe your process of putting it all together. Like, did you have earlier designs that you maybe, you know, got rid of that you didn't like? It's unique. It's really, really, really unique.
Oh, I'm glad you think so. I mean, the whole time, I think this is probably standard for most artists of any kind. The whole time you're drawing, you're thinking, I'm a fraud. I'm just copying everybody who I admire, you know? So I'm glad you think it's unique. I mean, like I said before, I've done a lot of autobiographical comics. I have another self-published series called Wait, It Gets Worse that I do with a friend of mine. And in those stories, they're all straight up autobiographical stuff. And those stories are fun to tell, but sometimes they get really boring to draw, you know? So when I was thinking about what kind of book I wanted to make, I wanted to make sure that it was something where at least half of the book was going to be really fun to draw. And I just love drawing pipes and wires and machines and dripping goo and all that kind of stuff. So I just kind of let myself go. And like back when I was in art school, I just did these gigantic drawings just filled with pipes and wires and stuff. That's like what I did when I was, you know, when I was under the delusion of being a fine artist. And so the alien world is really just a chance to let myself do that. And I kind of had to pull myself back some, because some of the panels in my original sketches, you couldn't even see what was going on, because I just filled everything up with pipes and wires and pustules and whatever. And I was like, I gotta cut some of this out. so you can tell what's going on. And I'm sure that some people would still say it's a bit overcrowded.
No, so I actually dig it. Like I personally think the background and all those details adds to the world. It gives it a more lived in sense and not realistic, but you can get a better idea as to like what the workers are going through in their like their society. The thing that actually I thought was really interesting is like Z and his alien race, whatever we're calling them. Their design feels like it enhances like the worker, schlumpiness of them. Like it's these aren't big giant brooding characters that are like clearly made for like construction or moving things or whatever. Like they're all kind of like lumpy and like that kind of stereotypical office worker with like the gut sort of stuff. Like they really kind of fit the world that they're in, which I thought was really interesting.
Cool. I'm glad that came across. I wanted to, as much as possible, like I wanted to break stereotypes about like aliens and like who the bad guys are, and like they're just these tiny little creatures, and if it wasn't for some of the machinery that they've built, it'd be pretty much ineffective. They're soft, they're fragile, their arms are spindly, and they all look exactly the same. The only way you can tell our hero from the others is that he has 3 nostrils and everyone else has 2. Like they're just, they're kind of pathetic. I mean, I really wanted, like everyone in the book is pathetic.
Yeah.
Like some of them think they're special and some just wish they were, but they're not, because none of us are really special.
It's a book where everyone's just kind of an asshole. Like there really is no one that's like super likable in a way. Like they all are kind of where you just want to punch them.
That's interesting. I'm okay with that. Although I hope that by the time the whole story plays out, you'll feel some kind of empathy for at least a couple of the characters. I did want to make sure that the I didn't want another like Luke Skywalker type hero character. Like that's the delusion that Scott is operating under, is that he could somehow be special and be the one and have the power or the force, and he does not, and he will not be that person at all over the course.
Yeah, well, like Scott, like I can relate to Scott. Like, I was picked on, I had pimples and all that. Like it's not like I dislike the characters of it. Like I absolutely relate to him, but at the same time, you just kind of want to slap him every so often and be like, dude, like you're a dick. Like really.
Yeah.
Like, your life sucks and you have all these things, and I get why you are the way you are. But at the same time, just like you've got a house, you've got someone who cares about you, and a grandmother or is it grandmother or aunt? Grandmother, I think it is. Who is a Jesus freak and irritating. You're bullied and all that, but like you have friends, and it's like your life isn't totally horrible. Like you're going through the normal teenager stuff, which I totally get. At the same time, I just want to grab him and slap him a few times.
Yeah, the slap comes in the form of like you see him being so full of self-pity and just can't get beyond his own carnal desires, but every time you cut back to the alien world, you see someone or something that has it like way worse.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I remember being a teenager and thinking just that, that I had the worst luck of anyone on the planet. And, that's so not true. That's just not true.
I also kind of took it as like, so you've got Scott and you've got Z, and it almost felt like, you're a teenager, you think your life sucks now, but Z is where you're going. Once you graduate high school and maybe college or whatever, and you go out to the real world, like you're going to become a cog in the machine, and that sucks way worse than what you got going.
Wow, I hadn't thought of that, but you're right. Oh,
right. Like that's kind of the read I was getting off the two of them playing off each other, which I thought was really, really interesting. And I like my gut says book 2 is like, Scott's going to learn that his life isn't quite as bad by talking to Z. and figure out like Z's life sucks way worse. And he might get some perspective that way. It's kind of the general direction I was thinking things would go, but obviously it's book 2, and maybe we'll have it discussed at that point.
I will say that he's led in that direction, but my goal is to avoid any kind of unrealistic redemption or premature wisdom. He's
still a teenager.
The whole book takes place really in no more than a week, or Earth time. It's questionable how long it takes in the other dimension, but that's not enough time for a 17-year-old to come to grips with anything.
Yeah. Speaking of Scott, like you put him through a lot of situations that I would say are very relatable to individuals, especially teenagers growing up. I said, like, he's a character I want to slap. Clearly you put in thought that he's not a character I want to pummel and hate. Like you put in situations and moments where you can relate and say, like, I've been there, I've done that, I've experienced that. What were those things done to make sure to humanize him so that he isn't a character that we just want to beat the crap out of, but we can actually like engage with in some way?
I guess if you think about it, like, again, Scott is not me, but definitely I'm channeling the way I remember feeling and certain dumb things that I did. And, when you are telling your own story, I think there's, no matter how much you wanted to say, oh, look at what an idiot I am, or look at what an idiot I was, you also want people to be like, to maybe like me a little bit, so like, yeah, I don't want him to just be a scumbag.
Yeah.
But yeah, his life is not good.
No.
So, the most likable person in the story to me, she doesn't get to do much in book 1, but is Julie, the girl that kind of sticks up for him in the parking lot. And she turns into a more complicated, interesting character as the story goes along, and actually might be the only person in the story who's actually capable of some self-reflection. And everyone, like, so at the end of book 1, well, I don't want to say too much, but in book 2, people that have been very far apart come together and have no choice but to learn a little bit,
No, that's okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So Julie's an interesting one in that I don't want to give up the moment, but like it definitely caught me in that there's something she does that if it was today, the reaction would be very, very different than the 80s, which I thought was interesting, and it kind of like reflected back of this isn't a today story, that this was 40 years ago ish.
Mm-hmm. Oh God, yeah, really, that long
yeah.
ago?
So I thought that was actually it was really interesting, because I got to that not really thinking about when the story took place, and that scene happens, and I stepped back and was like, oh wait, it's not 2020. This isn't like rural area in 2020. That's just like that Napoleon Dynamite. I'm not quite sure if it's modern times. I'm not sure if it's like the 80s sort of thing. Like, no, it's clearly the 80s.
Right.
Because of how because of the reaction to what she does, which is just a like, stop it, go to class, give me it sort of thing, which is totally different, where cops will be called and suspension, all that. Like it was just a really interesting moment in the story.
Well, she get if the object that she used had been found by that person, probably there would have been a bit more consequence in that moment. At least that was my hope. The cops don't show up until somewhere in book 2. I need to keep them out of the picture at that point. Yeah, I mean, and of course, attitudes about women were very different back then too, and the way that the male characters in the story treat women is the way that I remember it being, especially out in the country back in that time, you know. And I hope that readers understand that that's the time period and the mindset that I'm representing in the book. I do not endorse it myself.
Yeah, I mean the women are all objects. Like it's a very emphasized thing in many ways. You know, like how Scott looks at women through his moments. You've got Whatzit with his daughter, the bully with Whatzit's daughter. I'm blanking on her name. Even the Scott's boss and the random woman at the end. It's interesting is that like Julie is the only one that seems in control and like not a object for everyone else. Like obviously her, I don't know what you want to call him, the
stepbrother.
The stepbrother-ish.
Yeah, he's a douche.
Yeah,
and he only gets worse.
But even that, like she does kind of stand up to him of like tells him to like F off and she seems to be the one that stands out over everyone. Like it's an interesting to hear that there's more about her. I'm super happy because she was the one I thought was really intriguing as to where it could all go.
Yeah, she gets to do a lot in book 2. I'm excited. I'm excited about that.
How long is it taking you to like put together just that first volume? It sounded like you started working on it like 5 years ago or so.
Oh, actually longer. What happened was that it was actually about 10 years ago. I wasn't doing comics, and I hadn't really done comics since high school. I had done children's books. I spent a long time with my main focus being music, being in bands that nobody's ever heard of, and working in animation. That was kind of how I was earning a living. I had a good career in animation off and on for a while, but I just, I wanted to make comics again, and I thank my wife for encouraging me to do it. And I just started making Whatzit because I didn't know what else to make. No one was paying me to make comics. So I made an issue. I made the first issue of that, and I made the first issue of my other series, the autobiographical comics, which I do with my writing partner, Doug Latino. I made those 2 comics and got a table at Mocha Fest in Manhattan. Just kind of like, all right, let's see what this is like. And, it's not like I was suddenly selling a lot of comics, but within a couple of years, I felt like I was part of a community of people who I liked and who seemed to tolerate me. And for the first time in, I don't know, decades, I felt like I was part of an art community that I understood and that I enjoyed being a part of, and it wasn't about networking. It was about hanging out and having fun and seeing other people's comics. And so I got to know lots of people, and I kept making issues of Whatzit, and then like about 1 a year. And then I started getting paying work, and I kind of stopped working on Whatzit for a while. Then after I made a couple of books that were actually published, I ended up meeting Tim Seeley, who ended up at Heavy Metal. And, I was like, hey, have you seen this? And he liked it and hooked me up with them. And so it was kind of like after a few years of kind of feeling like maybe Whatzit would never really get finished. Like thinking, oh, well, this was the thing that it was fun working on it, and it kind of got me into this career, and maybe that's all it will be. Suddenly I had the opportunity to be like, no, like I can make this what I really want it to be. So I took the 4 independent floppy self-published comics, and I worked with 2 friends of mine, Josh O'Neill, who runs Beehive Books, and Oliver Irving, who is a movie director, and who I've been working on a graphic novel of his for a while. They both helped me kind of re-edit the story, remove stuff that needed to be removed, and kind of rework it, tighten it up, and with the idea that like now it's not just this little thing that may or may not go anywhere, but now we need to make sure that it's going to really work as a full story with a second half. And so that was a relatively long process. That took a couple months, but then once that was done, that became book one, which is what you've read.
Did you have to, I haven't obviously read the individual issues. Did you have to add material to kind of fuse the issues into book one? Or is it mostly like just editing out material?
Honestly, it was more editing out because like I had done the first 4 issues completely on my own, and there was a lot of self-indulgent stuff. When I started the story, I don't think I really thought it through as much as you should when you start making a graphic novel. But again, I didn't know. I'd never done it before. Yeah. And my mindset at the time was like, if I take the time to think everything through and write a complete script before I start drawing, I'll never start drawing because I'm an artist before I'm a writer. So I paid the price later of being like, oh shit, like this is kind of a mess. But it worked out. There was a lot of removing. There was even some like moving of panels around to really emphasize the back and forth between the 2 dimensions. And I think it works a whole lot better now. So
yeah, this was something that actually I really dug about it, is that the way it flows between the 2 dimensions, it really does feel like you're kind of like taking a camera from one to like pan out to see the other and zoom in to see the other. Like it's done really well.
Thanks.
Flow wise between the 2. Like there's some really cool, I don't know if I can call it, if transition is the best word or like how to describe it, but
I'm not sure what the word for that interdimensional whatever.
Yeah, it's good. It works really, really well, and you can almost feel like the camera panning like into the Z's world or panning out to Scott's world. Like it's I don't know how to describe it, but it's definitely something that stood out to me reading it, which I thought was really, really neat.
I'm glad. Yeah, it would make a cool movie. If there's anybody listening who wants to make it into a movie, just call me.
You got Heavy Metal, like they're known for animation, man. This would be the perfect thing.
That's true.
For it. So it's something I've talked to a lot of folks about. So this is under Heavy Metal's Virus imprint, which is kind of their indie thing. It'll come out in print eventually. It's digital now, although I think maybe you can get print coming out soon. I don't.
Oh, I think you can order it. It's like you order it through their website, and
it's
you
like pre-order.
You get an actual printed copy. Yeah,
I don't remember which is like going digital then print or print and digital. So yeah. the getting to the question, obviously you've worked on this for like 10 years or so. Comics have shifted as a whole in that 10 years. There's a lot more focus on digital. So the question would be is like, as you as a creator, are you thinking about the presentation between print versus digital and how it has to kind of straddle the 2, or how it straddles the 2, and how people might be engaging with it differently?
I'm old, and when I loved comics, there was no such thing as digital. Yeah. And then I drifted away from it for like 30 years and came back to it. And I guess the digital thing was already starting at that point, but like, that's not what I love. Like I love holding a book in my hands and turning the pages. And if people want to read it digitally, I'm perfectly happy with that. But for me, it doesn't exist if it's not a book. I mean, the book that I made a couple years ago for Comixology, which was the Harvey Kurtzman's Marley's Ghost. Like that's still not out in print. Hopefully it will be soon. And that was a super great project to work on. And it was cool to win an Eisner Award. But like for me, it still doesn't even really exist until someone can finally deliver me like a book and I can put it on my shelf, and then I'll be like, that's a thing I made. Like it still exists in some kind of weird, non-existing, another dimension, you could say. So I don't know if that answers your question. I guess it's basically just that I'm old and whatever. Digital comics, the more people that read it, the better. But
Yeah.
I want a book. I want a book.
Yeah, I mean, in the end, as long as people are consuming it, like it's a good thing.
That's true.
Yeah, it's just an interesting thing of because I know some creators are thinking about it more in like the transitions on panels and how maybe you'd flip a digital page and how you can zoom in a bit more, and like it's just interesting talking to people to see how much they're thinking about that. Like there are some who are even getting down to the pacing of panels and pages are a little bit different in digital. So it's why I kind of always want to ask, because it's just interesting to hear creators and how they're approaching it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't begrudge anyone who wants to work that way, and I think it's amazing that people could even think about it that way. I can't. Like, I'm 53. Like, I'm who I am. Like, I can't. I'm too old to like learn a new thing, and I don't really want to. Like I said, like hopefully there'll always be a place for books. I teach. I teach a couple of classes at a local college here in Brooklyn, and I know that the kids don't read anything in print anymore. It's all some form of animated digital stuff, and that's cool, and they should definitely learn that. But that's not something I can teach them.
Mm-hmm.
I can teach them how to draw or try to, and I can teach them. I teach anatomy for artists, and I teach illustration, and I can teach like sort of the old school basics of those things. But I am who I am at this point.
So I kind of want to talk about the art a little bit and a little bit more. So as we talked before, there's a lot of detail to it. There's other series that I kind of feel about this. Like there's a fine line between getting to that gross out humor. Like you can easily cross that line, and then that comes the joke, and that's the focus, and it's almost distracting to a point. This seems to do like a really good job of balancing the gross humor versus kind of like not tipping it so that that's all you're focused on, between the number of like zits on people or Z. Like it might sound like a weird question, but like were there designs where there's too many pimples? Like I think you kind of know what I'm getting at on that. Like there's had to been a thing where you're just like, okay, I create this character, and like now just putting that like that one zit or two more, like that's the line, or making it just a little bit bigger is the line. And
yeah, that is a good question. I mean, I think I've gotten so many different reactions from people, and I think a lot of it is you can tell a lot about somebody, and not in any kind of judging way, like by how they respond to it. Like I've had people, like I have a couple friends who they make horror movies. That's what they do. And yet when I told them about this idea, they were so disturbed. Like so disturbed about the idea, because some people just like pimples just are the grossest thing. And a lot of people probably have like post-traumatic stress disorder from the awful acne that they had when they were teenagers.
The beard. That's why it's part of the reason the beard is here.
Right. And I also am fully aware that like I'm a particular kind of guy who grew up at a certain time. Like I grew up reading Mad Magazine and coveted everyone else's Garbage Pail Kids cards, and then when I discovered underground comics, like I liked the most transgressive, naughty stuff I could find. That's some of which is now considered very problematic. But it meant a lot to me when I was younger, and a lot of it I still like, even if I'm not supposed to admit it. I would say that. Well, like the cartoonist, I never know how to pronounce his name, but he's my hero, Kleben. B. Cleban. He was like a panel cartoonist. He had stuff in Playboy back in the 70s and 80s.
I probably know the work.
He made some really weird books. He also made a book that made him incredibly rich called Cat. So he had cat merchandise. So a lot of people just know him for the cats, but he also made all these other books full of really weird drawings, like just like crazy weird stuff. But he was a brilliant artist, and he had really good politics and a great sense of humor, and he could like effortlessly slide back and forth between stuff that was really disturbing and gross and offensive and stuff that was kind of beautiful and spoke the truth. And I guess if, I could never be him, but that would be sort of like an ideal to reach for. It's kind of like punk rock too. It's like a good punk rock song that you first listen to it and you're like, kill the poor? Like that's awful, that's terrible. But if you listen to it, you realize that that's not what it's saying. In fact, it's saying the opposite, and using the power to like shock and be dangerous to like just doing that for its own sake, but if you can do that to like open people up to something, I'm not saying that's what this book does. I'm sure some people will look at this book and be like, this is just fucking stupid and gross and I hate this guy, but hopefully not everyone.
So actually, I've had you for a while because I kind of want to start wrapping up. Like,
sure.
What were some of your influences? Like, this is something I always like to ask creators. Like, growing up, what were the comics and strips and all that you liked reading?
Definitely Mad Magazine. Again, like those Cleveland books that I mentioned, somehow they showed up in my house when I was like 12 years old, and they blew my mind. Also, there was like Doonesbury collections around the house. I just remember looking at them, and I didn't get what any of the jokes were or anything, but I just remember the way he drew bullets flying through the air, like all the Vietnam strips. You'd have a bullet, and there'd be a little curly Q shape behind it. I don't know why. I thought that was awesome. Then, when I got into comics, it was all, my first love was Howard the Duck, Gene Colan, Klaus Janson, early Moon Knight stuff, Bill Sienkiewicz, early Frank Miller stuff, the first few issues of Daredevil that he drew when Roger McKenzie was writing it. Like, those were the comics that made me go, oh my God, I want to make comics, So those were big influences. Heavy metal for sure. I never quite understood what I was looking at, but so much of the art in there it was like printing was better. There was actual like watercolor, like rich environments and stuff that at that point, superhero comics were still printed pretty poorly.
Yeah.
So like the quality of the artwork in heavy metal and some of the Marvel magazines, like I remember like the Hulk magazine with the stories, but they always had like beautiful watercolored pages. Howard the Duck magazine, when it went to magazine format, like I still, again, the stories without Steve Gerber, not great, but I still keep a stack of those here in my studio just to look at the artwork and those things.
Nice. So as we wrap up, like, obviously you have more volumes of Whatzit coming. What else can you talk about that you maybe are working on that you can actually mention, or other things you want to plug before we wrap up?
Oh, thank you. So another book that's coming out pretty much simultaneously with Whatzit is Mega Ghost, which is kid-friendly. As you know, Whatzit is not kid-friendly, so it's nice to have something that kids can see that I made. Mega Ghost, it's published by Albatross, which is Eric Powell's company. And the trade paperback, which collects the first 5 issues with a bunch of cool extra stuff, that's available for pre-order now and should be in comic book stores and bookstores in October. And I'm doing a book for First Second that's part of their World Citizen series, which is also completely different than either of those things. And I'm actually a little afraid of what they're going to say when they see Whatzit. But I already signed a contract, so hopefully they can drop me.
Which one of those are you doing? If you can say?
I'm not sure if I'm supposed to say or not. I was told that I was allowed to say I was working on one.
Okay.
And that might be, I don't want to get in any more trouble. But it's not going to be out. Like I've just finished the first 2 chapters, and it's a 250-page book. So I'm going to be working on that for a couple of years, along with Whatzit volumes 2 and 3. Whatzit will be 3 volumes in total. And let's see. I guess that's what's on my plate. That, along with teaching and trying to not ignore my family, is what's on my plate right now. Oh, and then maybe I might be illustrating a calendar of that's all historical figures masturbating. So, but we'll see. We'll see if the funding comes together for that.
You can always kickstart it if it doesn't.
Yeah.
I kind of want to ask questions about that. At the same time, I don't think I want to ask questions about that.
Better just to let it lie.
Yeah, we'll look at the final product when if it ever makes it out there. So I appreciate it. Thanks so much for chatting. It's definitely a very unique series, and one that you could have a hell of a lot of debates and discussions about. So I'm really excited to see what Volume 2 and Volume 3 bring down the road.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you. You clearly actually read it and thought about it, and you made me think about it in some ways that I haven't, which is really good because I'm finalizing the script for book 2, and some of the things that you brought up will help me make book 2 better, I hope. So
I'm glad I can help in some way as well. Yeah, I mean it's an interesting read. Like it's, as I said, you can easily you could easily go and just take it at the surface level pimple jokes, but there's so much more to it that's going on. Like it's a very the thing that actually reminded me of, as we're wrapping up, the thing that really reminded me of in a good way is there's that Simpsons episode with it's one of the Halloween episodes where Lisa creates the Society of Tooth People.
Oh yeah.
And it kept on reminding me of that, and that's one of my favorite segments of The Simpsons ever. So was really excited about that, and even they're mispronouncing words and English and all that.
That's right.
I reflected on that a little bit. So all a good thing, because I absolutely loved that segment.
I've just been working through the first 15 seasons of The Simpsons with my son, who's now old enough to enjoy it, and it's been great to remember how awesome it was.
Yes. Yeah. So again, I really appreciate you chatting, and I'm sure we will talk again down the road when further stuff is out. So thanks so much,
Brett. I really appreciate it.
Yep. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Hey, thanks for watching the previous video from Graphic Policy Television. Just by watching, you help support our site. Thank you so much. Now, if you're watching these videos, you probably care about geeky things like movies, television, comic books, toys, games, video games, you name it. You can go and subscribe right now to our YouTube channel to stay in touch and catch all the new videos, or check out our website at graphicpolicy.com. There's a nice link on this end of the video. But as always, thank you for watching. Keep on rocking and keep it geeky.